Hey guys, I'm sorry, a couple of minutes late here. I was busy doing some stuff, but it's great to be here. Thank you for joining us. This is the Ramsey Paul Show. We do every Monday through Friday, Monday through Thursday. We do it at 11 a.m. and Friday we do at 8 p.m. Central. Today's Tuesday, and that means we have our roundtable tonight. Last week we had a great roundtable. And this week for our roundtable, I think we'll discuss the economy, tariffs, and if you want to be part of that, the community's growing. I got a couple more subscribers this week, so thank you newcomers very much. You can just sign up to my Substack. You can join the fun here. And what happens when you're with my Substack? If you're a paying member, you get to be part of the roundtable. And if you don't want to be part of the roundtable, you can just watch it. It stays up. It's a private video. And then every Friday, I do a video just exclusive to my Substack supporters. So I shout out to my Substack supporters. I really do appreciate you. And tomorrow night is Wednesday wrap up with Z Man, and we're going to talk about the economy and everything that's going on because I do think this is a major change that we've seen. In a sense, the whole globalism experiment looks to be over. And the promises of globalism never really happened. And it was just assumed that we would always be under globalism. But it didn't really work out. In some ways, it worked out and made about 10% of the population a lot richer, and especially people in what I call the asset class. So if you already owned a home or stocks or anything like rare paintings, art, assets just went through the roof because of this policy of easy money. And we would finance our deficit through exporting or through the trade deficit. And that's all coming to a halt right now. And just so you know, I did my video today, this morning, about the world didn't end. And it hasn't. The stock market yesterday, Kramer was, you could just make a lot of money going opposite of whatever he says. He predicted a Black Monday. We were going to have a stock market crash yesterday. It didn't happen. The stock market, it ended a little bit lower, but it was like a less than a 1% decline. That's nothing. That's just statistical noise. And today, the stock market, as of right now at 11 a.m., 11:05 a.m. at Central Time, is at about it's about almost 1,000 points up as a 2.5% increase. So it hasn't made up all the declines since the tariff bit, but there has been a bounce, which is typical. And the question is, it's still too early to say if we're going to go into a bear market or we're going to, or this was just a glitch. The market had to react to the tariffs and now it's going to be back on track. It's too early to say because even in a bear market, sometimes you'll have what's called a dead cat bounce, where when everything goes down, smart people, obviously, you buy low and then you sell high. So when everyone else panics, if you buy, when the panic subsides and the stocks go back up, you can make a killing. Most people do opposite. When everyone else is panicking, they panic and sell. When everyone else is totally greedy, let's say stocks going up, 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 they tend to buy at the peak. You don't want to do that. So there could just be a lot of people now trying to get some quick profits here by buying when it's low and they think it's going to go up. We will see. I think there's been a fundamental change. I don't think the stock market is going to be front and center as it's always has been since really the 80s, 1980s. Before the 1980s, the stock market obviously existed and people invested in it, but the returns weren't really that great. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One reason is just historical. Like my grandparents, they were old enough, they lived through the Depression and they saw how people lost everything in stocks. So they had in their mind stocks are really risky. You shouldn't invest in them. And my grandparents, they were very conservative financially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, especially. They would just save their money. And then when they had enough money, they had, at the time, you could buy like CDs, not that you put in your computer, but certificates of deposits. And they would pay a nice interest, because interest rates were higher back then. And this is always kind of the dilemma, is when you have a lot of easy money, it lowers interest rates. So you can't get a lot of money in your checking accounts or savings accounts. I mean, it used to be you could get 5% on your savings account. Now savings accounts get basically 0%. So it's like, well, what do you do with your money to keep up with inflation? You got to invest in something. And that's usually in commodities or stocks or assets. And that's what people have done. Z-Man, I read him every morning. He had a good article about that with like sports teams, that if you look at the fundamentals, a lot of these sports teams like the Boston Celtics, they don't really make a lot of money. They're kind of losing money because they have to pay all these super high salaries to the basketball players. And really ratings are going down. But they just invest in the asset, and the asset, meaning the basketball team, keeps going up, or has, like 13% a year. That's a good return. So you buy a team, and then you flip it 5 years in the future, and you make a lot of money. And I think that's what we've been in this economy. And this has created, I think, it's unfortunate, but it created a lot of generational divides between the boomers and younger people. And I don't want to bash on boomers or anything like that. I think they get too much of the blame for stuff that they had nothing to do with, like immigration into America, where we started to allow third worlders in. Until 1965, you just had to be white European basically to get in the United States. It's a lot better country back then. And that changed in 1965 with the Hart-Celler Act. But in 1965, the boomers were too young, that they weren't responsible for that act. That was the greatest generation, probably were more responsible for that act. Because you figure the earliest boomer by definition was in 1945, when World War II ended, because after World War II ended, the soldiers came home, there was a baby boom. So by 65, the oldest boomer would have been 20 years old. All right. So they had nothing to do with that. So they gets a lot of hate on, like, oh, you boomers, you put in the 1965 Immigration Act. No, they didn't do that. So I'm not trying to pile on boomers. But boomers, they were raised, they were kind of almost the last generation that was raised in the old America. And so a lot of them have troubles understanding the new America, because part of the human condition is you think back to the way things used to be when you were younger. And it's hard to think of anything different, and because your life experience isn't that. So when the boomers grew up, this was pretty much a 90% white nation, and it was actually more than 90% for most people, because if you lived, let's say, in the North or the Pacific Northwest, it was almost 100% white. Northwest Arkansas was basically 100% white. And the South is where you had a lot of blacks, and that was the only really minority, because there wasn't many Mexicans or Chinese or Indians, Muslims. It was just mostly white or black, and the blacks were primarily in the South. I mean, there were some in some cities like Detroit or St. Louis, but even those cities, they tended to be more segregated, and they stayed in their own neighborhoods. So even in those cities, you could live your life with very minimal contact with blacks. And so the only thing you knew about blacks was reading stories, or watching on TV, and and then they started, the propaganda that, like To Kill a Mockingbird, like, oh, the poor black boy is falsely accused of rape. And that put this into the psyche of a lot of these white boomers, because they never been around blacks. And this is how they thought they were, based on what they read and their TV, so they're very sympathetic with their plight. But they grew up in pretty much all white schools. The schools, they didn't teach like anti-white hatred. They didn't teach all this LGBTQ stuff that didn't exist, and they mostly got a fairly decent education. Wasn't perfect, but that's how they grew up. And then the economy was still fairly strong when the boomers were going, especially when most of the boomers, let's say the hippie era in the 60s, let's say that you were in the university during the 60s, during the Woodstock and all that. So by the time you graduated, you were in the 1970s. And the economy had some issues. Obviously, we had inflation and the oil embargo, but you could still go to the factory and get a job, and there was still a lot of jobs. And there wasn't at that much time so much racial discrimination against whites. So when you would apply for a job, it wasn't like the companies tried to exclude you because you were white, which they do now. So it was a different era. So these people that, they could save up their money, work for college, pay, and then pretty much pay for college. You could almost do that back in the day. You didn't need student loans. And I mean, you still had to work for it. But then after you graduated, college was a little bit more exclusive back then. They didn't allow in anyone like they do today. So it had more prestige to it. You had a college degree, you're pretty much set. You could get a job wherever you wanted, and you got a job. And then the social dynamics between men and women, well, there's always been issues, but I think it was better back then. Most men did have girlfriends. Women were still hypergamous. That's just built into their nature. But you couldn't, it was harder for women to act on that because there wasn't social media to get validation. Their validation could only come within a smaller circle, their local area. So people tended to match up, and men tended to get married to women. They didn't have gay marriage. And then a man would have enough money to buy a house, and the houses were a lot cheaper, even if you adjust to inflation, they were. And I think my father, but his first house, and it was an expensive house. It was in Arvada, Colorado in the 60s. I think it was $28,000. And that was a nice ranch house in the suburbs. Of course, you made less back then, but still, it was a one-car garage, and he could afford a car. He worked for Mountain Bell. And my mom at the time, she worked when she met my dad, but then after she had my brother, Steve, and me, she stayed home. And that was enough to provide a decent life in the suburbs for the family, go on family vacations. I guess in some ways we weren't as wealthy as a lot of people are now as we see it, because, we couldn't afford like a European vacation. And a vacation was to throw the kids in the back of the station wagon, head back to Illinois, because that's where my dad's parents were and my mom's parents, because they were from Illinois area. And so that was vacation, but we had fun as kids. And again, the house by today's standards, it wasn't a McMansion. It was a small ranch house, but they had it was a lot of property back then. They put houses on big lots back then, but it was, it was pretty good. And the neighborhood was all white and the high trust, social value. Kids would play outside. So it was a pretty good life. And so getting back, so that really worked for the boomers. And then what happened when we get into the 80s and 90s, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union. And part of what happened is that there was this idea, well, we got to have globalization now, where the United States is a dominant power, and we got to try to eliminate barriers to trade, because that would make things more prosperous. And we need to bring diversity in the country because we need recipes or something ridiculous. And that became very popular. In fact, there was a book, The End of History. People thought that history had ended. Everything had been decided. I mean, obviously events would still happen, but there was no more big questions about should we have monarchy, or should we have feudalism, or should we have capitalism, or should we have communism. Once communism fell, is we had this idea, okay, well, we've decided the whole world is going to be based on liberal democracy, whatever that means. But it's kind of like big corporations, and we have homosexuality and that type of thing. That was the whole idea, and the whole world's going to be this way, and we want to flatten the world and make the world smaller. You probably heard all those cliches back in the day, and we'll eliminate trade barriers, so capital can go from one country to another. So if you're General Motors, you don't really think of yourself anymore as an American car company. You can build your cars in Mexico. Maybe you have a home office in America, but that's how people started to think. And then if that can work with money and trade, why not with people? Why not just import a bunch of Vietnamese or Venezuelans or Mexicans or Haitians? Because another aspect of that time was that we were all the same. Human beings are all the same. There's no differences between humans biologically. And if you think that, you're ignorant. The only difference is people have different skin color, which I don't believe is true, but that's what they believed. And that became a center belief. That was part of the religion it is now. So if you question that, that violates their religious beliefs, because they really want to believe in the equality of everyone. And they justify it by saying, well, all people bleed red. Like that means anything. Yes, snakes bleed red. Well, it doesn't mean anything. So that happened. And as part of the transformation in the workplace, I lived through this. So you had a lot of these boomers, they got into nice jobs in the 70s. And by the time a lot of this globalization happened, which again started to offshore jobs or to bring in low wage immigrants, or in the tech industry to get rid of programmers that had good paying jobs in America, send it to low wages in India, or call centers. Call centers weren't necessarily high paying jobs, but you didn't really need an education. Americans could do it. That went to India, which everyone hated because you can't understand Indians. But that process happened. But the boomer generation at the time, it really didn't impact them as much, because how they rolled out these changes were fairly smart. They basically said, well, you don't have to worry, right? So Mr. Boomer, we're not going to replace your job. No. And in fact, here's the thing. By this time, a lot of the boomers were managers. And well, you got to show that you're a good white person and be committed to diversity and offshoring. And we're going to base part of your compensation, Mr. Manager, and how much, let's say, blacks you get in, or women, or whatever. You'll get a huge bonus, and your job's safe. We're not going to replace you. You're safe until you retire. And it wasn't just high level managers, it's just in general, even union workers. It's like, your jobs are safe. It's just the younger people. So what happened is a lot of the white boomers, they accepted the deal because they got theirs, right? They already had their home. And now at this point, they've been investing in the stock market, 401ks. They bought their home years ago when it was very affordable. And now they saw all this globalization, housing prices increasing. And they like that because they feel richer now, right? Because they bought their house when it's like $120,000. Hey, it's worth $500,000. I'm rich now. I feel rich. My stock markets my investments have gone up. I'm feeling really rich. So it was a good place for them. Although long term, they were starting to change the country, because the younger people, especially young white guys, couldn't get these jobs, or it was more difficult. So they couldn't start the family formation. And some of the things that the boomers would say was, and you see this meme a lot, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You just got to hit the pavement more. And I don't think they meant that meanly, because back in their day, if you didn't have a good paying job, it's just because you were lazy. Anyone that wanted to work could get a good paying job back in the day, at least when they grew up right after World War II in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so that's how they saw everything. And it created a lot of resentment, because now a lot of the younger people, they can't get into homes because of asset inflation, because of globalization. Homes are mostly affordable in a lot of places. And a lot of people, they can't get good paying jobs. And we have a problem in this country. As someone once remarked, the Dow gets up to 40,000, but food lines are getting longer. That's happening in Canada and elsewhere. We got a lot of problems in this country. So globalization, again, was a really good deal for the people that already had theirs. And again, I'm not blaming boomers for this, because any generation would have done this too. I mean, they were in a good position. So except for the social capital affected them too, higher crime and stuff. But again, that they had already had bought a house, so they could sell it and buy a bigger house in the suburbs away from diversity. And so it was a pretty good deal for them, right? And their standard of living went up, and then products became a lot cheaper, because instead of Americans making it, there we had Chinese making it for pennies on a dollar, or Mexicans. And instead of paying, let's say, a white teenage boy, I can remember, because I was a teenager in the late 70s, or even before I was a teenager, say 10, 11, 12 years old. I would have been 12 in 1975. A lot of kids, you made money by mowing people's lawns. They pay $5, I think, or something. But that is gone now, because now you just pay these Mexicans that are illegals, or, because they work cheaper. And you see this problem, and I don't know if you guys ever seen where you are. It's rare now to see, when you go into fast food, the way the economy used to work. It used to be basically a majority 90% white nation. You would go into McDonald's, and who would you see working there for the most part? You would see a bunch of white teenagers working there, because it's a way for them to make some money. Maybe they wanted to make some money to buy a car, the kid, boy, so he could date girls, or maybe save up for college, or save up for a stereo. Or that's how kids did it. So they got these jobs in fast food, low industry wages, and then they would save up, go to college, and so forth. But now these jobs are mostly not white, and they're some of the people. I went into the Brahms here, and I can't understand what they're saying, because they're just like fresh off the boat from Venezuela or something, real fat, middle-aged brown woman. And I'm like, this has been a huge change. And again, you used to have like white kids mowing lawns, and now you just have illegals. And again, it's led to a lower cost in some things, but there's higher cost, what you would call social cost, in other ways. And this even impacts the boomers, because the areas are not as safe anymore. And there's a cycle. I think we owe this. So this has been kind of a long roundabout why globalism, again, it's been very good for some people short term, although it's destroying their country, but it's been bad for the average American person, and especially younger people. They haven't been able to get cars. Everything's very expensive. College is outrageously expensive. The jobs aren't there anymore, because you're officially discriminated against. So that's why we see a generational divide here, that the younger people don't really give a damn about the stock market, and they're not really shedding any tears, because some boomers could lose some of their 401ks. They don't really give a shit. They can't even get into a house. So I think that's why you got some of this generational divide stuff going on, and they don't really care. They're like, fuck your stock market. I don't care where it goes. I want jobs here in America. And I think that's Trump's vision. I know it's his vision, and his Treasury Secretary has talked about it, and J.D. Vance has talked about it. J.D. Vance knows. He was raised in Ohio and the Rust Belt, how they took all the jobs away, and the social impact it has is devastating when you don't have good jobs for especially men to do. It creates so many problems. And you could say, well, it provides for cheaper labor, but so Trump is trying to reverse all that, and I think it really is now with the tariffs, and we're focusing back more on the nation, like it was in the 50s and 60s, or even back the late part of the 19th century with McKinley. Trump always brings up McKinley, because that was a very prosperous time in America, and we had a lot of high tariffs to protect American industry. So Trump's vision is all this work should come back to places like Ohio, Indiana, let's say Fort Smith, Arkansas, and then maybe young guys, maybe even young white guys that don't go to college, can get a decent job and start families and pay taxes. I think that's his vision. Now there's issues with that because now we also have automation and AI. Will that eliminate jobs too? So nothing's ever exactly the same, right? We can't recreate the 1950s exactly because it's a different era. In 1950s, half the world was communism, the other half was destroyed from World War II. In the United States, we were the only free superpower. Soviet Union was under communism and fairly poor. China was under communism, but now now China, at least they have the Communist Party, but they embrace capitalism, and at least financially, and they're big on their businesses and so forth. And they've really benefited from the trade policy with the United States. Their standard of living has gone up quite a bit while ours has decreased. And Trump saying, well, that's not fair. We've had enough of that. And so these tariffs, China's really freaking out because China, they're maintaining everything based on having the United States as a customer. If they lose us as a customer, or at least partially, that could cause social problems in China. Because again, they got a communist government, but as long as people are well fed and they think, prosperity is always there. A lot of the Chinese cities are more modern than the United States. They got modern infrastructure. Everything's not run down in China like it is in the United States. And that could change basically with these tariff policies. So we see a big change here. And as I said, one of the interesting things I observed is a lot of people just have Trump derangement syndrome. So whatever Trump supports, they're going to attack. But Trump's tariffs is really attacks on mostly wealthy people and beneficial to working people. And it's funny how all the Democrats, these are the same people that might have been part of Occupy Wall Street. Remember a couple of decades ago? How long ago was that? I forget. It just seems like it was yesterday, but time goes quick. Remember Occupy Wall Street? And now the same people, in many cases, are defending Wall Street. We got to defend Wall Street. We got to protect our billionaires. It's funny how that happens. So I think we're in a fundamental change here with the trade policy, the idea of the end of history. Well, that turned out to be false. And we're having a big realignment. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but that's just the reality of the situation. And oh yeah, Row House sent something to Ben Shapiro's concern. Let's take a look at what Ben Shapiro says here. I usually don't really care that much for someone like Ben Shapiro because he's more interested in his ethno-state Israel than America. But let's listen to him.
Yesterday, President Trump declared that it was in fact Liberation Day, his giant tariff policy that he just dropped on the market unilaterally, probably unconstitutionally. Trump's reciprocal.
That's not unconstitutional, and it's not he just dropped on the market. Trump's been talking about tariffs since the 80s, and he's always talked about this. You can make a criticism of Trump, like, he's never mentioned Greenland, try and take that over before the election. I think that's valid. But no, tariffs, he just didn't drop. He's been signaling this forever.
Tariffs impose hundreds of billions of dollars in new taxes on Americans, be the largest tax increase since the Revenue Act of 1968. One of the biggest tax increases on American consumers in the history of America. And it's going to cost American consumers. It will cost American producers who use inputs from other countries. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted immediately more than 1,000 points. The S&P 500 plummeted more than 3%. The NASDAQ plummeted almost 4.5%. There are real-world implications for this sort of stuff. Trade wars are, in fact, not good and not easy to win, particularly if you don't actually have a plan. It is predicated on a bad idea of how international trade works. A fundamental misunderstanding of trade deficits. Trade deficits they're an accounting procedure. Trade deficits have pretty much nothing to do with the health of an economy. I can name you a period in American history where there was a fairly large surplus in America's balance of trade. The entire Great Depression.
Well, a couple of things wrong with him. Trade deficits do matter because this is what I was talking about. You need to be able to manufacture in the United States. And the whole idea with tariffs, he says it's a tax on consumers. Not really. It's a tax on the countries that want to bring stuff in. And I know Ben's upset because Israel is had the tariffs too. I think if as long as the tariffs weren't on Israel, he would probably be okay with it. But so how this works and how we didn't have an income tax in America years ago is it was funded by tariffs, because companies, if they want to bring their product in, they have to pay a tax to the federal government. And so the federal government gets that revenue. Now, you could say, yeah, but indirectly it's a tax because these companies, and like China, they have to charge more than in order to recoup for that tax in America, which is true, but that makes American products more competitive and people are more likely to buy American products, which again creates more jobs and social capital in America. The way that Ben Shapiro was talking about, we could talk about the theory, but we've seen the reality of it. The reality of total open markets, and it kind of correlates with total open borders, is eventually you lose your country and your country is no longer prosperous. It doesn't mean everyone's poor. Certain people are rich, but you see a bigger divide in money or equity, or the rich and the poor divide gets bigger and you start to lose your middle class. And it's not a one-off. We saw this now happening in the United States. We saw this in Canada and in Britain. They haven't become wealthy because of free trade or immigration, by the way. Their standards of living have fallen. And we've seen this now in the United States. It's not healthy to export all your jobs offshore and to try to lower us down to the standard of Bangladesh. I don't want that. I don't want that at all. And so the question is, yeah, it does make things a little bit more expensive because maybe instead of paying, let's say, white teenagers to work at McDonald's, maybe it's cheaper to pay illegals. I'm not saying they hire illegals, but it would be cheaper. But is it worth it from a social capital point of view? Like as Z-Man said, he brought up a good point. Because of all this immigration, when you go to the emergency room, it looks like a Tijuana bus stop. Do we really want that? I don't want that. Do I really want all the jobs being exported so people, someone on X way back said, well, you could always get a job at Panda Express. Well, I don't think that's a very healthy economy for that. So, yeah, I don't think his view is very well. Pam, hi. Do you think this $5? Thank you. Do you think this new economic model will work? And would you be satisfied only using this to getting the different trade deals? Yeah, it will. I think I am for tariffs. I do think this model will work. And again, this depends on what you mean will work for who, right? Is it going to be beneficial to the top 10%, what I call the asset class? No, it's not going to be good for those people, but it's going to be better for the majority of Americans. So in that sense, it will work. And again, we didn't really have so much of a choice because we were like someone just runs up their credit card bill. Eventually, there's a day of reckoning due. And that is what has happened with us. Eventually, the interest on our debt was going to be more, it's already more than we pay in national defense. It's not sustainable. We kept kicking the can down the road, but now we can no longer kick it down the road. And there had to be functional changes. Otherwise, the whole scheme would have collapsed. And so, it can be painful, but it's definitely a necessary thing to do. And again, from a national security point of view, you're in trouble if you don't make anything. Britain's a joke now because they don't make anything. And you can't just have finance being your whole economy, or selling marijuana or gambling or OnlyFans. You need to be able to produce things. At least that's Trump's belief, and I believe he's correct on that. So I do think it's going to be necessary to do, and that's how it is. So I think it'd be beneficial to most people, but not all people. Again, the people that were in the asset class, they may start to see things change. Because again, I was getting back to the stock market back in the 60s, 70s, until the 80s. The stock market was like slow gains. It wasn't like a casino that it is now. And when you did invest in stock back then, a lot of what you got were dividends. Now no one gives a shit about dividends. You just want the asset price to go up so you could flip it. It's kind of like a big Ponzi scheme. It's all it's become. And those always break apart. And that's not really healthy. So I think we're going to go back more to the old model. So what would happen in the future ideally? I mean, I just see realistically, I don't think the stock market is going to be the place where you're going to see a lot of big booms like you have since the 80s. And in general, the whole asset class is just going to be a little bit different. And you're going to see more people invest in traditional like CDs or treasuries that they may have a higher interest. I think you'll see asset prices start to level off and maybe even fall. And that's good. So it depends where you are, right? So if you're, let's say if you're that hypothetical boomer, bought your house for $120,000 40 years ago, now it's worth $800,000, then because of a depreciation of asset prices is back down to $500,000, well, your house is paid off. Are you really hurt that much? I guess you're kind of pissed because, oh, it was worth $800,000, now it's worth $500,000, but it's paid off, so it doesn't really matter. But this allows the younger people to get more into assets because, again, the houses weren't supposed to be for investments. They were supposed to be a place to live. And I think we're going to see that through the whole asset class in general, because that's the reason people invested in assets, because you couldn't get a return on treasuries. Because always, if you want to invest in treasuries for total safety, because unless the United States government goes kaput, then you have bigger problems. It's a safe investment. You're not going to lose your money. But you got to look, well, how much interest I'm going to make on that a year? And if it's like 2%, you're like, well, that sucks. Inflation is like 4 or 5% or whatever. I need something that makes more of a return. And then you look at stuff like stocks. Oh, I get mutual funds and I can get an average of 7%, let's say. So I'm going to invest in that. Some people that are more aggressive, they're like, hey, I'll invest in artwork. I can buy these paintings for $20,000. And then in 5 years, I can sell the painting for $30,000. I got a nice return there. So that's going to change. I think asset prices are going to come down. And assets include stocks, Bitcoin, crypto, housing prices, artworks. All of that is not that you're not going to see. If it doesn't come down, you're not going to see the big run up like we've seen. It's just not sustainable. And who knows, people may even start to open savings accounts at the banks. Remember those saving accounts? Maybe that will start to come back in vogue. And you'll have people start to, hopefully industry return to the United States and people get decent jobs. And maybe you won't have that, upper middle class lifestyle as popular anymore, or, where you take all your European vacations and you have your 3 cars and your boat and all that. Maybe those days are going to be gone for a lot of people. So it's going to be a shift. For a lot of people, it's going to be good. Other people, it won't. Are politicians like this when you dislike Trump? This is Rojas. Thank you, Rojas. Yeah, this is something I had in my prep, and I don't not like this about Trump, and this is one of my criticisms. So here we are. This is it.
During my first, but despite that, we have a tremendous military. That was a very small portion because we rebuilt the military during my first term, and we have great things happening with our military. We also essentially approved a budget, which is in the facility, you'll like to hear this, of $1 trillion, $1 trillion. And nobody's seen anything like it. We have to build our military, and we're very cost conscious, but the military is something that we have to build, and we have to be strong because you got a lot of bad forces out there now. So we're going to be approving a budget. And I'm proud to say, actually, the biggest one we've ever done for the military. We're cutting other things that were under Doge, but under a lot of other. When you look at a woman getting $2 billion for environmental, and it had nothing to do with environmental, and they had $100 in the bank, and they give her $2 billion. Many of those cases, all that stuff is going to be cut out.
Yeah, this is a problem that I was worried that Trump would deal with. This is Republicans. They have a fetish that we always need to spend more money on the military. And I put the military in quotes because a lot of the money spent on the military is, I think, very much wasted. I would have liked to seen Doge look at that quite a bit. It's a big racket for the most part, meaning with the military industrial complex. Eisenhower warned us about this in the 50s, and he was right about that. So you have places like Lockheed Martin that make a lot of money by selling very expensive weapon systems that may not really work or ever be used, and they're extremely pricey, but they make a lot of money off the sales of this. And then we have all the expense of the people. The military, I think, is one of those things. It's a big expenditure that we can control, and it drastically needs to be cut. And we would be just as safe, because if you think about it, you don't need a huge military in a peacetime. You can always, and if you have industry, so if you have tariffs and bring back the industry, you can scale up pretty quick if in an emergency. But I don't see it. And I know Trump is saying there's a lot of bad people out there. Who's he talking about? The Houthis, people running around in sandals with $20,000 drones. You don't need a massive military for that. And I don't see Russia is going to try to take over the world or anything of that. And again, if they invaded Europe and I'm wrong, and Putin secretly wants to take over the world, then yeah, we could declare war on Russia and scale up the military quickly. That's no problem. Or same with China. China may take Taiwan. I don't even know if they're going to do that, but I don't see China really wanting to take over the world. That Chinese never been that way. So we really don't need a huge military. And to put it in perspective, we spend more than all the other countries in the world combined. And that is just ridiculous. And we just don't have the money for this type of thing. So it is, Pete Hegseth, thank you, Mr. President. The first $1 trillion budget. That's nothing to brag about. President Trump is rebuilding our military and fast. And yeah, I don't think just spending a lot of money is fast. I do think reforms are needed in the military. Obviously, if you look at it, a lot of the people look to be obese, women, or incompetent. We had cross-dressers in the military. There needs to be a reforming that, and it's a lot of poor officers. But I think we could spend a lot less money and just focus on certain technologies like drone technologies and so forth, and missile defense, than have this bloated military. So that is unfortunate, and I disagree with Trump on this. I think this is a waste of money by far, but that's how that is. So yeah, that sort of sucks there. So that is the military stuff. All right, let's see what else is happening. We talked about Cramer. I think you can always get rich of Jim Cramer. Just do opposite of what he says. I wish I had Jim Cramer in Las Vegas. I would say, Jim, here's a roulette wheel. Pick red or black, and I would just bet opposite of him, and I would win a lot of money. He's always wrong. So that is pretty crazy. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, I had the some of the stuff we're doing in the military is good. Like getting out of some of these deployments in Europe. President Trump announced the U.S. considers withdrawing troops from Eastern Europe That'd be good. That's a lot of expense, and we have no need to have those troops in Eastern Europe. And Seth Jones warns a downsizing of U.S. forces would weaken deterrence. I don't really see how. They said embolden Vladimir Putin. I think what they're trying to say here is unless we have troops in Germany, Putin will invade Germany on his nefarious plot to take over the world. I just don't see that as anything likely. I think Putin says that's absurd. I think it's absurd. And again, if Putin should invade Germany or any NATO country, that would spark Article 5. And I have no doubt Trump would respond and we would could send troops over there. So I don't think we need troops over there to have a deterrent. There's no indication or evidence that Russia wants to attack a NATO country. The situation in Ukraine, if you understand it, just didn't come out of the blue. I'm not going to go through the whole history, but there's a lot of history there why Putin went into Ukraine. It used to be part of their territory. And so that's different than Germany or France. So I think that's a little bit of fear mongering. So I would like to see us withdraw from Europe. I would like to see us withdraw from most places in the world. We need to focus on America, not these other countries. And I think that is that is pretty crazy how that does that. All right, let's see what else here is happening. We did get a good Supreme Court ruling, so this was good this morning. Although it was pretty close, sadly. The Supreme Court today rejected the idea that far-left judges in D.C. can overrule President Trump's immigration enforcement. This is a major loss for the lunatics and a major win for the American people. So it said that the removal of the Aliens Enemies Acts are subject, so it is allowed to happen. So I think this is good news. And again, you don't want to overstate this. So I think Trump is still going to have problems with the district judges. The judges, that's going to be the hardest part for him to implement a lot of his policies when it comes to immigration and deporting people. It was a little easier to defend the border, but this is going to be difficult. But at least the Supreme Court ruled this one particular act is legal, and he does have the authority. So this is good news. This is good news for the, as J.D. Vance said, I think for America. I'm happy to see that. Let's see here. Some other good news. Let's see. Today at 3 p.m., President Trump will sign an executive order reinvigorating affordable, reliable, and clean coal. Coal is critical to achieving American energy and AI dominance. Yeah, coal is the key thing. Our energy is very much going to be very important. And they're talking about AI. One of the big problems with AI is how much electrical demand or energy demand it will take. It's huge. And this is having a good infrastructure is going to be key. So along with globalism ending, I think we're seeing the whole climate change hysteria bullshit is also ending. Even other countries are starting to question it. They've always been wrong. All their predictions, these doomsdayers that by the year 2008, Miami will be underwater. So they've been consistently wrong. And I think that is I think we're going away from that. Definitely Trump is. And I think we'll see other countries doing that too. Okay. This is a sad situation of kind of the race relations in America. I did a video about this. And this is just how tech companies really hate white people. Could you imagine like Gibson and Go having a project up or a funding project for Dylan Roof? But instead, they have this black guy that murdered a white teenager because a white teenager touched his backpack, and in how blacks think, if a white person should look at a black person in the wrong way, that justifies murder. If they should say the wrong word, that justifies murder. This is how they really think, a lot of them, and they're very tribal, unlike white people. It's funny how white people react different. If a white kid like Dylan Roof should kill some blacks, white people, they don't run to the defense of Dylan Roof. They just feel guilty. They start crying and everything. But we see with blacks, they actually are trying to raise $300,000 for this 17-year-old that murdered a white teenager, knifed him to death because he touched his backpack. And they consider that self-defense. I don't want to live around such people. Such people just make civilization impossible. And we're seeing that, and it's just crazy. But it's really crazy they allow that funding up. Again, if a white person had killed a black, they would take down any sort of thing like that immediately. So it's kind of like, well, in our society, it's somewhat okay to kill white people. And there's nothing, it's just really crazy how we got to that point. Let's see. I got a super chat, so thank you. I appreciate that. Let me roll up here. See if I get this here. Let me get your super chat from Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. I thought I saw this. Maybe here it is. Ryan, thank you. The left would want the market to collapse just to be justified and proven right at the detriment of everyone else. Psycho behavior. Yeah, they do. I'm sure they were cheering the stock market collapse as a way to totally own Donald Trump. Yeah, it is odd. I guess, you know, it is odd because you have people like Bernie Sanders upset about these tariffs. He used to be for tariffs to protect the working man. So a lot of this is just whatever Trump does. Like I think Trump once quit. He could develop a cure for cancer, and people would protest it. I have no doubt they would. And they're just totally lost because they consider him to be the devil. I don't know how you deal with people like that, but that's it's a real thing, sadly, and it's a bad thing. So yeah, that is sad what we see there. Now we'll have to see long term. I think long term, if these tariffs stay in, and I think there's no other way but to have these tariffs, I think the asset class will not rise as fast as we used to see. So I guess you would say a little bit I'm bearish on the stock market, but bullish on America. I don't think the stock market and America are the same thing. And I think a lot of people, again, they mixed that up. They thought if we have a good stock market, then that must mean America's doing well. And obviously, when we have a lot of lines for food banks and everything else, that is not the case. So yeah, that is definitely something to take a look at here. So all right, let's see what else here. I accidentally closed this window back here. All right, we're about wrapped up here. Let's see here. This is cute, and it's interesting. It's kind of a philosophical thing. They have some of the gene sequences for some extinct animals. In this one company, they claim this is a dire wolf, and they used a dog as a surrogate mother. And they have some of the DNA from the dire wolf. Sounds like something out of the Game of Thrones. It went extinct about 10,000 years ago. And they were able, they think, to recreate it. And they had 2 pups here. So let's take a look. This is what the howl sounds like. Sounds like a dog to me. So, yeah, that's there's a question. This is the first dire wolf howl in over 10,000 years. And is this something that's good to have? Should we bring animals back? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with that. As long as we have an environment and habitat for them. I know a lot of people think, oh, Jurassic Park, but dinosaurs, they were millions of years ago. They're kind of a different thing. I don't think we can bring them back or should bring them back. But some of these wolves or like the passenger pigeon, especially animals that man hunted to extinction, I'd be happy to bring back, like the woolly mammoth. I think there are places that you could still have, put it, as long as you have the environment for these creatures and they can be sustainable. I have no problems with it. Extinction is sort of natural though, and it's not always because of the evil of mankind. And we're part of nature too, but because we're, I think, above most of nature, we try to be good stewards. So I don't really have a problem bringing these wolves back as long as there's some environment they could be part of. Because again, they were here not that long ago. I know 10,000 years seems like a long time, but people existed then. We had civilizations then. So I'm okay with bringing them back, or the passenger pigeon, or the dodo bird, stuff like that. I think would be good to do if they can bring that back. I think it's kind of amazing what they're doing there. So I'm on board with that. I don't really see that big of a huge issue there. And let's see here what's else. And I think those were the big things that are happening. But there's some controversy. Is that really a dire wolf, or is it something else? Because it's, it had to use a dog surrogate. So is it real, or is it science fiction? They were using genetic techniques to recreate what they believe to be the extinct dire wolf. And however, there's a debate whether the animals are true dire wolves or genetically modified gray wolves designed to resemble dire wolves. And so I don't know. Is it really a dire wolf when you just kind of mess with that a little bit? They say it is. I'm not really quite sure, but I'm okay with bringing them back. I don't think it's going to create a big issue. I think it's pretty cool, really. All right, guys, it's been a fun show. And if you haven't, as a reminder, be sure to subscribe to me on Substack, because we're doing the, what are we doing tonight? Oh, the roundtable. I think it'd be good. We're going to talk economics tonight, and that will be at 7 p.m. Central. And to be a part of that or watch it, there's a lot of good people that join that, a lot of good perspectives. That's at 7 p.m. tonight. So look for that. And tomorrow, big day. I have the RAMZPAUL show during the day. And in the evening, one of my favorite shows I do with Z-Man, the Wednesday wrap up with Z-Man. And we're going to dig into all this tariffs. And he's got a pretty good perspective. He's been in the business world for quite a while. And we'll talk about what this really means for America. So guys, thank you, Steve, for joining. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.